I should start by saying that I always hated going camping. My parents sent me to summer camp every year in Colorado, which involved at least one camping trip into the woods. Despite the brevity of these trips, I always resented them. The heavy bags, the lack of toilets, the spiders that always found their way into my tents. When I turned 16, I became a camp counselor in training. However, my distaste for the whole experience briefly changed. At that age, we were only a few years older than the oldest campers, but we were given considerable leeway in what we were allowed to do. Most nights, we would have to stay in our cabin with our campers, but it was rumored that the camping trip was a time where the counselors in training would get drunk, smoke weed, and hook up with each other after everyone else went to sleep. What I didn't know, however, was that the events of that camping trip would dissuade me from ever going camping in the woods again. The trip began like any other. Altogether, there were around 30 people on the trip, 4 counselors in training, 4 counselors, and around 20 or so boys and girls between the ages of 13 and 14. Walking in a single file line up and down the various trails, you could hardly hear any sounds of nature over the conversations and laughter of the campers. Several hours went by, and we made our way through a dense marshy area and up a steep incline populated with evergreens and aspens. I wasn't the most athletic kid, so it was around this point that I found myself at the back of the line with one of the other counselors in training, Jordan, as well as 2 campers who were also struggling to keep up. The 4 of us started chatting, and in our distracted state, we began to fall more and more behind the rest of the campers until the last of them faded out of view around a bend 50 feet up the way. Unconcerned, we kept walking at that same slow pace, but after 30 minutes or so, the trail started to level off and I began to feel increasingly anxious. Not only had the rest of the group disappeared ahead of us, but we entered a stretch of completely dead evergreens, half of which looked scorched by a wildfire, and the other half appeared to have been killed by a disease. The eeriness of the landscape was punctuated by a small, beat-up cabin sitting in the middle of the scorched forest, but seemingly untouched by the fire that must have spread throughout the area. We were so entrapped by the scene that one of the campers screamed when a twig behind us broke. Me and Jordan started laughing a bit, but we quickly stopped when we turned around to look at where the sound had came from. Not 20 feet behind us was a haggard-looking man with a messy nest of black hair and a long black beard slowly making his way up the trail with his eyes locked on us. He didn't appear to have any hiking supplies on him, and we had no idea how long he had been walking behind us. Being young, we were naturally pretty freaked out, but Jordan managed to give the guy a slight wave before saying to the rest of us, "Come on, let's speed up and get back with the rest of the group." As we turned to continue our way up the path, the man mumbled a question that was hard to hear, and I was shocked when Jordan turned around to ask the man to repeat himself. The man murmured again, slightly louder, "Going camping?" Jordan answered the man that yes, we were going camping, to which the man smiled slightly before stating in a creepy and ominous voice, "Better be careful." We nodded and gave a half-hearted thank you before continuing on to try to find the rest of the group, this time with a much faster pace. Although the man had been walking up the same trail as us when we saw him, he didn't continue, but instead just stood there in the middle of the trail, watching us as we made our way up the winding path and disappeared from his view. Finally, we managed to catch up with the rest of the group, who had been waiting for us, and we told the adult counselors about our interaction with the man. They shrugged it off, telling us that the guy probably lived in that cabin and just wanted to know what we were doing near his property. Still, I felt unnerved by the encounter, and when we finally arrived at the campsite, I couldn't shake that feeling that the man had somehow followed us. Eventually though, I put it out of my mind and managed to enjoy myself a bit. Everyone else had gone to bed, and Jordan and the other counselor in training from the boys' cabin had brought 2 warm mic handers that they had stolen from the counselor's quarters, and I took out a joint I had stashed away for this exact occasion. To avoid getting in trouble, we decided to hike out into the woods a bit to smoke the joint, and we made our way to the edge of the river where we had washed our pots and pans earlier that day. The spot was eerily silent, and the thought of the man from earlier kept popping into my head. Assuming that I was cold and not anxious, Jordan gave me his blue hoodie, and this prompted one of the other girls to suggest that we switch tents for the night, so I could sleep in the same tent with him and she could sleep in the same tent as the other boy. I had absolutely no problem with this, and after smoking, we made our way back to our tents, which were pitched slightly away from the others, and we discreetly shipped on the mic harders while telling scary camping stories. Some time passed, and one of the boys was in the middle of a rather muddled story that he was clearly making up on the spot when he suddenly stopped. In the silence, we could hear what sounded like footsteps crunching on pine needles about 40 feet away, near one of the campers' tents. As we strained to listen to what was going on, the noises stopped, and even though we assumed it was just one of the campers getting up to go to the bathroom, being stoned and hopped up from the scary stories, we decided to call it a night and go hide in our tents. Jordan followed, and we awkwardly made out before eventually going to sleep. I don't know what time it was, but it must have been quite late when I suddenly woke up to the distinct sounds of footsteps walking around my tent. Shot with adrenaline, I tried to lay as still as possible and quiet my breathing. From the sound, it was apparent that someone was less than 3 feet away from the front of my tent, seemingly pacing back and forth. I turned to wake up Jordan, but I was immediately put at ease when I saw that he wasn't next to me. Assuming Jordan was the one I had been hearing, I closed my eyes and I was just beginning to drift back to sleep when I heard the tent unzip. I felt Jordan lie down next to me, and after a few moments, he put his arms around me and began to spoon me. After nearly drifting off to sleep again, I realized I had to go to the bathroom and muttered something about going to pee before beginning to unzip my sleeping bag. Seemingly annoyed by the noise, Jordan lazily turned over, pulled his hoodie over his head before going still again. Quietly, so as not to wake him up, I unzipped the tent and quickly scanned the campsite for any movement. Comforting myself that Jordan had just gone to pee and was fine, I put my shoes on and began making the trek across the campsite to the designated pee zone. I had just made it to the area and pulled my pants down when I heard rustling coming from the campsite, as if someone was rummaging through our supplies and bags. Still slightly drunk, I tried to pull my pants up, and in haste, I lost my balance and tried to catch myself with a branch that made a loud snapping noise when I grabbed it. Before I could even think, I was blinded by the bright light of a flashlight shining directly in my eyes, and the light was getting bigger. So whoever it was, they were coming towards me. Frozen and panicked, the figure got 10 feet away from me before I heard Jordan's voice say, "Sorry, it's just me." I breathed a sigh of relief, but then Jordan asked me something that really confused me. "Have you seen my blue hoodie? I know you gave it back to me, but I think one of the campers might have stolen it from my bag while I was sleeping." After a brief pause, I managed to stutter out, "But you were just wearing it when you got back in the tent." What he said next made my blood run cold. "What are you talking about?" he said. "It's been missing since we got back from the river. I even went down there to see if I had left it by the accident, but after I couldn't find it, I thought I checked the boys' bags, and that's when I saw you." My confusion quickly turned into sheer terror as I realized that the man who got into the tent with me just moments prior hadn't been Jordan. Sensing that something was wrong, Jordan asked me what happened, and I managed to figure out that whoever stole his hoodie was sleeping in our tent. Not believing me, Jordan insisted on walking back to the tent to check it out. As slowly and quietly as possible, we made our way to the side of the tent, and when Jordan flipped on his flashlight and shined it through the nylon lining, he let out a high-pitched scream. We could both see the clear outline of a man's shadow lying still inside our tent. What happened next is a bit of a blur, but we ran to the pod of our tents on the other side of the campground where the older counselors were sleeping and frantically unzipped their tents and started yelling for them to come out and that there was a man in our tent. I remember panic setting in as our counselors slowly and groggily woke up, but after a bit more frantic yelling, they finally managed to understand the severity of the situation when commotion broke out on the other side of the camp near our tent. By the time they ran to the scene, however, they only found an unzipped tent and a bunch of our littered things on the ground that the man had apparently knocked over or thrown during his escape. After that, we heard the counselors radioing back down to the camp to call the police, and we could tell that they were as scared as we were. I don't think any of us slept after that. Luckily, we only had to wait a few hours for the sun to come up, and by that time, a few of the other counselors had arrived with guns to escort us back to the camp. On our way back down, one of the campers found Jordan's jacket tied around one of the trees on the path like some kind of marker. Needless to say, he didn't want the hoodie back, and we just left it there. To this day, I can't say for certain that the man in the tent was the same guy that we ran into earlier on the trail, but his face and that night still haunt me. I worked at a small Domino's for about 2.5 years. This happened about 6 months into working there. I was 18 at the time, pretty much freshly 18, and was working there, to pay for my car payments, and have a job while I figured out what I wanted to do in life. I was working a night shift with my boss, assistant manager, and a few others. My shift started at 4 in the afternoon and went until midnight, so I was a closer. About an hour into my shift, a man parked a white truck outside and walked into the building. I was working in the front, so I greeted him and asked him if he had an order placed already. He said yes and told me his name. His order wasn't ready yet, so I told him that would be a few minutes. Now to me, everyone looks tall considering I'm 5'2", but this man was tall. I'm guessing around 6'4". He looked older, like late 20s to early 30s, was heavier set, white, and was wearing a Wendy's uniform. Being the typically friendly person I am, I made a conversation and asked if he worked at the Wendy's across the street, as I had used to work there. He gave me a smile and said, "Shame, wish you were still there for my sake." To me, that was odd, and his tone definitely sounded flirtatious, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. After a bit more of some small talk, I gave him his pizza and told him to have a nice night. About 30 more minutes went by when the phone rang. I picked it up and answered it. "Thank you for calling Domino's. This is Jordan. How may I help you?" "Oh, the cute redhead that just helped me out." My heart dropped, my suspicions being confirmed about the guy flirting with me. He asked me for my number, and I told him no thank you, and I wasn't willing to give that information out. Told him to have a good day and hung up. I was hoping that that would be the end of it. To be sure, I had let both my boss and assistant manager know what had happened, and I was uncomfortable. Luckily, they completely understood, my boss making a comment. "Not saying this is a bad thing, but you barely look 16, so he almost sounds like a pedo." Now, from an outside perspective, he could have just been being friendly. Yes, I understand that. And at that point, I could have just been overreacting. You're right. I was just uncomfortable. Fast forward to about 10 at night. I saw a white truck park outside the building, and the same man got out of the truck. I immediately turned to my assistant manager, her pulling me into the back and into the office so he wouldn't see me. My boss approached the guy and asked him what he needed, but the guy just kept looking around for me. I could see this because the office had a window that sort of acted like a one-way mirror. I started crying, my manager hugging me and telling me she wasn't going to let anything happen to me. She's a big girl, not heavy, just bigger and more built than I am. My boss spoke to the guy saying, "Look man, she already rejected you, and I'm not letting you see or talk to her. Get out of my store, because if you can't tell, she's effing uncomfortable." The guy's face twisted in anger, and he stormed out of the store. He climbed into his truck, backed out of his parking spot so fast, he spun his tires and squealed off. I had let out a sigh of relief, my boss coming to the back to check on me and let me know that I was safe, to take my time and clean myself up, and I could go home early because that was a lot to handle. He then went back up front to run the store. My manager and I sat there and talked, her trying to make me laugh a bit while I calmed down. The phone rang in the office, and my manager answered. Later, I found out it was one of our drivers. He called asking what vehicle the guy that was harassing me drove. She told him a white truck, and he said that the guy was driving his truck around the parking lot, circling it, waiting for me to leave. My manager said, "Oh, F no." By the time I said what, she was already up, her taser in her hand, running out of the office into the front door. She ran outside and made it go off, giving the typical shocking sound. He left the parking lot and sped off down the street. At this point, I called my dad. He was across the street at the bar. I told him to come to my work and follow me home because this creepy guy was freaking me out. Pretty quickly, my dad got there, gave me his keys, and told me to drive his car and he'd drive mine in case the guy knew what car I drove. I drove home with no issue and barely slept that night. For the next month, that guy would park in the parking lot next to my car for hours, waiting for me to leave the store. I never left while he was there. Eventually, he stopped parking and just circled the parking lot and building a few times a day. 3 months later, it all finally stopped. Nothing has happened since. I work at an arcade or a fun center with a ball pit and a bouncy house. Most of our customers are nice people, but there will always be an aberrant few among the crowd, one of which I encountered on my most recent shifts. This isn't the first time I've seen this man though. We had first met a few weeks prior. He brought his 11-year-old son and his 2 friends to the arcade. I was stationed at the bouncy house that day. I thought it was odd that I hadn't seen him before because he had a membership, and I had been working there for almost a year. The three young boys ran into the bouncy house, and a man sat on the bench right next to where I was standing, even though all the others were empty. He didn't look shady or anything. He wore black sweatpants and a gray t-shirt that matched his sneakers. He had short, curly hair and a light brown skin that was dusted with freckles. His deep brown eyes seemed to sparkle as he looked up at me and smiled. I grinned and asked how he was doing, and we fell into a pleasant conversation easily. He asked me what my name was, and he introduced himself as Donald. He was kind and charming at first, and I appreciated his company. As we talked about our days, he began to slip details of his life into his sentences. How he loved his sons and thought it was amazing that I was so good with kids. I said that the boys were well-mannered and were a pleasure to have, which is a statement I stand by. He pauses for a few seconds and sighs as he says, "Yeah, but it's hard out here being a single dad." I sympathize with him because my mother was single for a long time after her divorce with my father. She works herself to the bone every day, and I'll never forget everything she does to give us a great life. That is why I didn't find the comment too strange. However, soon after, he became more direct, continuing to emphasize that he was single. He asked me if I was in college. I was a bit more firm as I disclosed that the fact that I'm still in high school, and I was 16. He smiled and asked me, "How old do you think I am?" I kept it cool, thinking maybe he was just playing around. I looked at his face for a moment and guessed he was 28 based on the subtle creases in his face and a few strands of gray hair. He wore a boyish grin and laughed as he said, "Nah, I'm 32. I was surprised and I told him I thought he was younger than that. I was trying to be nice. Another chuckle escaped his lips as he hummed and nodded. He turned away to look at the kids again. After a few seconds, he turned back to face me and asked me the question I had been dreading. "How old are you?" His eyes were laced with something I couldn't define, an instinct twinkle that made my heart drop. I had a feeling this was coming though, and I didn't want to believe it. I'd hoped he was trying to be friendly, but a deep pit had formed in my stomach. Something wasn't right. The flirting was obvious now, and I wasn't sure what to do. "I'm 16, I said curtly. He raised his eyebrow and smirked again. With an eager expression, he asked me when my birthday was. I tried my best to be obtuse, but I tend to worry about coming across as rude. "My birthday is in May," I stammered. I cursed at myself for revealing the fact that I could soon be of legal age, and I was terrified that he saw that as a sign to continue flirting. As he was about to ask me something else, another parent came to ask me a question. Astonishing relief swept throughout my body as I eagerly stepped away from Donald to speak with the other parent. More people began to trickle into the area, and I made sure to talk to as many other parents as I could to look busy. Around 15 minutes later, most of the parents and kids trickled out again, leaving me isolated with Donald. He scooted from the middle of the bench to be closer to me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his eyes trail up and down my body, his gaze falling onto my hands. He seemed to notice the ring I was wearing and asked, "You married? You have a boyfriend?" His voice was laced with urgency. I thought I was going to burst into tears right there and then. I was so taken aback by his question that I couldn't even come up with a lie. "No, I'm just working on myself. I'm enjoying being single." I did my best to sound confident, but my voice still shook with depression, threatening to break. "Good for you. How old are you again?" He cocked his head like a curious dog. "I'm 16, I said, even more firmly. I wanted this man to leave me alone, but I didn't want him to lie about me being rude to him. Kids still remained in the bouncy house, so I couldn't leave the area." That's cool. I really respect that, you know. If you ever need to chill and hang out, you can give me your number and you can come to my place." He smiled widely, while his stinging eyes cut through me like a blade. I nodded vaguely as I stormed away to look at something in the bouncy house. Tears threatened to spill down my face as I tried to steady my breath. The last threads of my composure were beginning to snap. I took in deep breaths, and as if heaven sent, the kids with Donald ran out of the bouncy house and asked him to go to the ball pit. The boys grabbed their shoes hurriedly and scurried out of the gate as if they were late to an appointment. I faced the exit, to watch them leave. As Donald trailed slowly behind the boys, he turned back to face me and said, "See you soon." I turned my back to him as a silent tear slipped down my face. He left shortly after. Now that you have context, I'll tell you what happened to me on the 19th. I was working on the ball pit that day, and everything had been going smoothly so far, even though I was sick with the fever of 102. I decided to wear a mask to keep others safe, and because the ball pit is equivalent to a petri dish, I had been kicking stray foam balls away from the gate when the door sensor chimed. I walked over to look at the front, and I saw Donald's child and his two friends run inside. Donald walked in a second later, and I thought I was going to faint. Unfortunately for me, him and the kids came over to the ball pit first. I let them in wordlessly, not even looking at Donald's face. The kids ran inside, and interestingly enough, he didn't say anything to me. He didn't even look at me. I don't think he recognized me with the mask, at least not at first. As his kids played, he sat on one of the benches, playing with his phone. The ball pit was busy at the time, so I felt safer knowing that I was surrounded by other parents. The universe seemed to be vouching for me that day, because I got my break about 5 minutes later. I took my break outside. My mother and father called me, insisting that I tell my manager that he's back. I assured them that I would, and I spent the rest of the time finishing an episode of a podcast. After I clocked back in, Donald left the ball pit and I was alone. I decided to spend some time cleaning up the place since I had nothing better to do. I made sure to keep looking behind me though, just in case. I spent some time picking up balls on my hands and knees, and I got up to sweep some more out of the way of the gate. As I walked towards one side of the gate, I saw Donald walking around with his phone up, very obviously filming. He was alone, and he walked quickly with a purpose. He filmed the front of the ball pit, and his camera started sweeping towards my direction. I turned quickly, not wanting to be filmed. I leaned quietly against the section of the fence and waited for him to leave. I stayed there for about 30 seconds, and when I turned around, he was still there, less than 2 feet behind me now. He jerked his phone away from my direction and stormed off towards the other section. I hoped he was showing the ball pit to someone over FaceTime, trying to block the thought of him recording me, but a question still remained. How long was he filming? My manager was nowhere in sight, so I decided it was best to stay there and monitor everybody that came in or out of the area. Quickly, a family of COD regulars shuffled into the ball pit, a mother and 4 children, between the ages of 2 and 8. We didn't have that many customers at the time, so I could help them collect the balls and play with them, which eased my anxiety. We played for around 15 minutes, and I got up again to watch the gate. That's when Donald came back, once again, without his children. His phone was pointed at the ball pit again. He was leaning on the gate right behind me, and his phone was pointed directly at the group of the young children. I finally had enough and walked up to him, speaking in a sharp, concerned tone. "Sir, please do not film children that you don't know." He looked at me blankly and replied, "I'm not. I'm showing my wife. See?" He flashed his phone at me, which showed a woman on the screen. He pulled his phone back towards his chest quickly, but not quick enough to deprive me of the details. The woman's face was completely still, and the camera in the bottom right corner did not show my reflection, even though his phone was pointing right at me. He wasn't on FaceTime with anybody. It was a effing screenshot. He held his phone tight and practically jogged away, gathering his children and leaving shortly after. My mind raced through a million questions. I thought he was a single father. Did he lie about being single? Or did he lie about being married just now? Was he taking pictures or videos of me before? What about the children? These questions stewed in my head as our store neared closing hours. As soon as I saw my manager, I spilled my guts about what happened, throwing in every detail I had about the weird stuff Donald was doing. My manager was horrified and wanted to ban him right there and then. He texted the head manager immediately, but I told him to wait on banning him. The manager was puzzled, and I asked him why would I want to do that. I was honest with him. I told him that I was worried. If Donald gets banned from our establishment the day after I called him out, he's probably going to realize that had something to do with me. I'm scared that he'll be angry. I don't want him to come after me. He doesn't know that much about me, but plenty of people are savvy enough to find out. He nodded silently and said that everything was going to be taken care of. I thanked him and left for that evening. I don't know what's going to happen or how this was resolved, but I don't think that man should ever be trusted around children. I never want to see him again, but if I do, I pray to God that we're not alone.